This happened at night, during a terrible downpour, when lightning illuminated the cloud-covered sky, and the thunder was deafening in its volume. That very night in the church, under the priest's supervision, the heroine got married for the second time. The man turned to the groom, Lucas Bitterfin, whose face showed no emotion, and asked him if he had promised to marry the heroine, Briella Ford. The priest then turned to her with the same question, and concluded by asking them both if they were prepared. If they were prepared to love each other for the rest of their lives. To the sound of thunder and lightning outside the church window, the girl, keeping silent for just a moment, she nodded. Without a shadow of a doubt on her face, the girl swore on her life, without saying she was only doing it for revenge. What prompted the girl to make this decision happened 5 months ago during a dinner at the Imperial Palace. The heroine, now represented by Olivia Ron, was congratulated on her pregnancy, and she asked, confused, if that was the case. The old man, surrounded by several other courtiers listening attentively to his words. Standing in the shadows, he assured the girl with a happy smile that she would have a son. People immediately started whispering among themselves as a certain blonde man sat down at one of the tables. He smiled sarcastically at the news, clearly skeptical. It turned out to be the current emperor, Gusto Ron, who added that it was strange to hear such news after 4 years of calm. And at a dinner, Gusto continued to reproach the empress for some mistake that happened one night. And then the boy mockingly suggested that she didn't carry his son in her heart. Olivia frowned and paled, hissing quietly that he was clearly overstepping his bounds. The eyes on the emperor's impenetrable face betrayed anger, but he replied calmly that if he was right or not, it would become clear later. And then he laughed again, that it seems women don't forget their first men. Addressing Duke Bitterfin. At that time, Lucas Bitterfin was known for conquering the northern lands. The boy ignored his words and continued quietly drinking a sip from a glass. He rolled his eyes, thinking both were incredibly annoying to him. Then the emperor rose from the table, saying that such shocking news had taken away all his appetite. But before leaving, the boy turned around and with the most ironic smile wished his wife a pleasant evening with her ex-boyfriend. An awkward silence reigned in the hall. Lucas sighed without even looking at Olivia, and she just looked sadly at his profile, not understanding what her fault was this time. Lucas Bitterfin was actually a prince, but 16 years ago he lost his right to the throne due to a coup d'etat. The new emperor left him only the pitiful title of duke, which looked more like a dog collar. Since she was little, Olivia was supposed to become his empress, which is why they were already engaged. But Olivia had to give up the engagement for the well-being of her family and become the wife of Gusto, the new future emperor. Of course, after this, they were definitely not meant to be together. But there was a single night between them, when Lucas fought with his lover. The girl came out of her memories and recalled the life within her. Yes, no one will congratulate her on this event, but there will still be at least one person by her side after his birth. The heroine clasped her hands in prayer and asked the goddess to bless her son, because she is a great hope for her. 5 months later, the news of the empress's pregnancy spread throughout the state, and the neighbors were very happy with the news. Olivia was standing by the window when the advisor addressed her. He said that the internal budget must be redistributed due to some error. The empress quickly reviewed the reports and noticed that the budget for next year had already been allocated, and that there should be no problem. The tense counselor replied that all the money had already been spent on the Pink Palace, and now it was necessary to distribute the budget from other palaces to cover it. Realizing what was happening, the girl frowned. The Pink Palace was where the current emperor's favorite concubine lived. This girl was called the most beautiful flower in the empire, despite her arrogant nature. And eccentric, Gusto was getting crazier about her every day. And the more he captured her heart, the more arrogant she became. It was obvious to the heroine that this concubine would definitely take her place. And thinking about this, she clenched her fists angrily. Olivia, angry, handed him the paper and hissed that if that girl expected to get the budget from her palace, it wouldn't work. She then addressed her assistants again, replying that due to the birth of the child, funds were also lacking in her palace. Although the advisors tried to say something, Olivia clasped her hands, firmly stated that she would not change her decision, and shouted at everyone to leave. As they left, the heroine thought that, in theory, the ministers should prepare everything for the birth of a child. But no one, including the emperor himself, showed due interest in it. Suddenly, the girl spotted a maid standing at a distance and asked why she was still there. The maid bowed her head and humbly replied that she could not leave the empress while she was pregnant. But the girl ignored her words, trembling with anger, because she understood that most likely he would hand over all matters to her, without showing up even once in 6 months, just to look at her. The maid handed the girl a letter with a red seal. Olivia took it in her hands in disbelief. She briefly examined it with her eyes for a few moments, and then ordered her to prepare for His Majesty's arrival for tea. The street was already fully illuminated by the moon when the heroine asked why her husband had come to her so suddenly. To which Gusto replied that it was better for him to come himself than to call his pregnant wife to his home, because that way he wouldn't fall in the eyes of the public. Then he continued drinking calmly, but Olivia was still worried, because every time the emperor visited the palace, problems always happened to her, and this time was no exception. Suddenly, Gusto handed the girl a pale pink box tied with a beige ribbon on top. Olivia looked at the box confused, afraid to touch it, and asked what was inside. However, upon deciding to open the gift, the girl could not contain her emotions, and she was sincerely surprised when addressing him. Inside the box were wonderful peach-colored shoes, and while the heroine admired them, the emperor declared that it was his duty, as a father, to prepare the first shoes for the child. Olivia looked at him stunned and asked if he made them himself. He nodded vigorously and proudly showed off his bandaged fingers, admitting that he hadn't thought it was so difficult to produce children's shoes. The heroine gasped in disbelief, but the evidence was before her eyes. Suddenly, Gusto began to apologize for his behavior, excusing himself by saying the news about the child caught him by surprise, and he didn't know how to behave. Then, he gently took her hand in his and told her he would try to be a good father if Olivia gave him a chance. For several seconds, the girl could not utter a word, still surprised by his words. And then she became emotional. Barely holding back tears of joy, she simply thanked him, thinking that, even if he didn't become a good husband to her, Gusto might well become an excellent father to their common child. The boy laughed and said he would like to hear the child's thanks. Olivia replied that the baby definitely liked his gift too. Then the emperor asked her how she could know this while still in the stomach. And while the girl replied, with a smile that even being there, the child understood everything, Gusto called the maid for a new serving of tea. As the woman poured tea, she mused out loud that the empress knew quite a bit about babies. Olivia replied that for the first time being pregnant, she couldn't help but prepare for this, carefully lifting the cup. And then, calmly and confidently, she brought it to her mouth. He densely caught her every move with a strangely jubilant expression on his face, and continued the conversation by saying he would try to visit the baby more often. From the window, it seemed that the atmosphere between them was truly almost familial. And inside, one could hear Augusto asking Olivia about the possibility of touching her belly. He raised his hand hesitantly and asked where the child was. The heroine, with a smile, moved her palm to the correct spot, assuring that the baby was also happy to meet his father. She started crying again, but this time without hiding tears of sincere joy, thinking that the maids who said the emperor needed time to realize he was a father were right, and their common baby was still receiving paternal love. But suddenly, the pleasant atmosphere was replaced by sharp pain and the smell of blood. Olivia stumbled, feeling the bloody liquid stain the floor and her shoes. She looked at her hands in shock, mouth bloody, asking what was happening. She didn't understand how it was possible that her body was bleeding. The heroine coughed, breathing heavily, and slowly realized what was happening. He approached her and casually told her he didn't expect to be fooled so easily. An unpleasant, smug smile appeared on his face, and then, laughing with a crazed expression on his face, he asked if her son was happy now. Olivia clutched her throat and realized she couldn't breathe. She felt with all her being that the inner life was slowly fading away. The heroine herself was already disoriented in space and vaguely heard Gusto's smug voice, who said that his beloved lover had caused a terrible scandal when she found out about Olivia's pregnancy. He smiled as he continued saying that the whole problem was the baby in her belly all along. Tears streamed down her cheeks as consciousness gradually faded. Olivia deeply regretted not accepting to save the life of the little miracle she carried inside. And falling dead as if surrounded by butterflies, she thought for the last time that she would immediately follow her son. The full moon illuminated the sky as a white-winged butterfly circled the narrow street, and then a blue butterfly fluttered through the window, beating its delicate wings. The heroine took a deep breath and opened her eyes, lying on the disheveled bed in a nightgown. The room was lit by the dim and uncertain light of a single candle placed on a cobweb-covered chandelier. The moon shone from the window as the heroine, clutching her throat, tried to grasp where she was and what was happening. She remembered drinking poisoned tea. Inanato. She also remembered how she started coughing and bleeding, but Olivia more clearly remembered how she died with her son, suffering unbearable pain and resentment. The heroine covered her mouth to ward off the memories and felt nausea rising in her throat. Paying no attention to her surroundings, the girl jumped out of bed, ignoring the dirty walls, the moldy water, nor the cobwebs in every corner, looking for a place to get rid of the nausea. The girl rushed past a full-length mirror, dressed in a dirty dress that was once snow white. But suddenly the heroine stopped and realized that out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone else in the reflection. She turned around and looked at herself in the mirror, mouth agape in surprise. The girl was convinced that she had not imagined it, but the question of how it happened that she was in another body still remained open. In the reflection, she only recognized bright blue eyes, but these facial features and the long, silver hair were unfamiliar, and she couldn't even imagine who she was in her new appearance. The door opened with an old, unpleasant creak. The heroine looked around and realized that she had never been in the place where she was. She was in a narrow street where houses stood almost next to each other, and there was trash on every corner. Looking closer, she noticed a poorly dressed man sitting on the porch next to a pile of garbage, holding a bottle in his hand. When trying to approach him, the heroine stepped into a dirty puddle with her bare feet. The girl immediately shivered from the cold, clutching her dress, which somehow warmed her against the night wind. She suddenly realized that since she felt cold, it meant she was still alive. She wanted to be happy, but clutched her stomach remembering her dead son. The girl bit her lip out of unlimited hatred and resentment. Tears of despair appeared in her eyes again because her son was not with her. The girl fell to her knees, clenching her fist and trying to wipe away her tears. And then she looked up again, seeking revenge on Gusto for all her suffering. The heroine swore she would stab a knife into his vile heart and make him pay the full price for the death of an innocent child. To get revenge, she needed to find out what happened to her and how she could be used. The heroine turned to the man, who responded immediately. When she approached to ask if the Ron state was here and if so, to clarify the way to the palace. The men looked at each other confused, and one of them spun his finger at his temple. Then their faces lit up with torturous smiles that boded no good. A third vagrant appeared from the darkness, and the men slowly surrounded the girl, assuring her that they would see her off. And then one of them twisted the heroine's arm behind her back, not allowing her to move from her spot. The girl screamed at him to let her go, indignant that he dared to touch her like that, to which they simply laughed, claiming they didn't care what kind of lunatic they ran into. Held fast by dirty hands, the heroine understood that it wasn't in vain that she was still alive, which means she needed to escape the clutches of her attackers. She closed her eyes tightly, praying for them to simply back off. And then the girl bit the vagrant's hand so hard that he screamed loudly and jumped away from her. The remaining two noticed that the heroine was running away when the injured one ordered them to grab her. Meanwhile, the heroine tried to get out of the alley and find a main road, where there was a high probability that someone would save her. And now she was almost approaching the road, lit by a lantern, feeling that this was exactly the place she had to go. However, they almost caught her again, and the girl ran towards the road. The man firmly grabbed the heroine by the dress and happily shouted that he had caught her. She turned around and saw that he was clinging like a tick. I started thinking hard again about how to get out of this situation, when suddenly I heard the sound of a carriage not far from that same wide road. And although the rapist was glad he caught her, the heroine paid him no attention and fixed her gaze on the great road ahead. She suddenly slowed down for only a second, contemplating her next steps. The girl suddenly pulled free from the man's hands, which he did not expect, so he stood still for a moment. Then the vagrant tried to catch her, and the heroine got closer and closer to the precious road. Almost running towards the sound of the carriage, she thought the risk would be worth it if she managed to escape them. The heroine jumped straight onto the road, waving her arms. Seeing the carriage very close, the girl thought that although she couldn't protect herself or the child before, but after so many losses, she was ready for anything. The carriage had already approached closely, and the coachman, frightened, tried to shoo the heroine off the road. Instead, the girl clenched her fists and looked determinedly at the approaching threat. She closed her eyes, flattering herself with the idea that she would survive for the sake of revenge for the child. And for herself, because it wasn't in vain that she was given a second chance. The horse neighed loudly in fear and reared towards the heroine. A few seconds later, the full moon reappeared from behind the clouds, illuminating the accident. Inside the carriage, a young aristocrat whose face was hidden in the shadows immediately asked what had happened. The vagrant heard the coachman say that the girl ran directly onto the road and fell under the horse's hooves. A gang of homeless drunks decided to retreat because it was better for them not to mess with aristocrats. And now the carriage owner approached the heroine's body, asking what was wrong with her, to which the coachman assured that she had lost consciousness and suggested they were chasing her. The aristocrat opened the door of the carriage where he was sitting. He stood near the carriage steps and ordered the coachman to seat the girl inside. The inscrutable face of Lucas Baderfan could be seen in the moonlight. He looked at the girl again and added that he would take her home. The heroine's morning began inside a huge mansion in a luxurious room. The girl squinted in the sun, lying on a soft bed in a comfortable shirt. As soon as she moved, someone addressed her and approached the bed. So far, the heroine had been struggling to recall memories, but suddenly she looked dumbfounded at the man approaching her. It was a tall guy named Baron, and the girl clearly knew him. Baron was now in this place as her attending physician, describing her condition, but he noticed a strange reaction and immediately asked what was wrong. The heroine remembered that Baron was the son of the ex-king's doctor, but after the coup, he disappeared without a trace to follow Lucas. And as the girl realized he was alive, the boy examined her incomprehensibly. The heroine continued recalling and straining her brain, and suddenly she realized something. At that moment, she was on Lucas's huge estate. Then she remembered the carriage and concluded that it was Turfin's carriage that ran her over. The girl decided to calm down and pull herself together. The heroine believed that the goddess had sent her another chance to take revenge on the cruel reprisal against her and her son. Meanwhile, Baron continued his report on her deplorable condition, trying to give a recommendation to take pills after meals. But the heroine interrupted him mid-sentence, whereupon the boy looked up from the reports and looked at her in surprise. And then the girl confidently repeated that Baron told his master that the golden rose had come to meet the black wolf. Soft grass, the rustle of leaves, an embracing wind, and a gentle sun surrounded the forest location, where a phrase about the wish for all inhabitants thereof to live in peace was heard. And harmony. Little Lucas and Olivia were sitting under a tree when the girl asked what he meant, and Bitterfin replied that his father wanted that too. Then, the boy added that recently he began to doubt the accuracy of his beliefs, because his wishes were too utopian, and more people were moving away from his father, following Gusto, when he said with a grim look that he foresaw total darkness ahead. Olivia looked at him surprised. A warm and comforting smile appeared on her face, and the girl said that then she would be with him and illuminate his path. Blood rushed to her cheeks as she added that she would be his bright golden rose, and she would go to meet him, the brave black wolf who would undoubtedly become the new head and guide the Ron state. Then, with the most charming smile on her face, she extended her pinky finger to him, offering to seal their little agreement. Lucas asked Baron about the rescued girl's words. The boy replied affirmatively and quoted again the words that the golden rose would meet the black wolf. Lucas firmly grabbed the paper on the table when Baron called him again. He chuckled irritably, looking away. The boy remembered the promise they, as children, made with their little fingers. It was a secret that no one except him and Olivia could know, a secret that became their code. Lucas wondered how a girl from the poor streets could know something like that. There was a high possibility that the words she spoke were planned to get closer to him. Therefore, after a while, the boy headed to the room assigned to him, realizing that he had to find everything out personally. He frowned, astonished by the girl's audacity in daring to call herself a golden rose. The heroine at that moment was standing by the window, realizing that to take revenge, she needed a person who could easily enter the palace. Now that fate has pushed her towards Lucas, she needs status to be close to him. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Bitterfin's voice. The boy closed the door when he asked who she was. The heroine fell silent for a moment, as Lucas was only a couple of meters away from her. It even seemed like she wouldn't answer at all. In fact, she was incredibly scared because she pressed her chest with her hands and closed her eyes, fearing meeting him. However, determination reappeared because it was impossible to stop now. In the beginning, the heroine turned around and told the terrible news about the death of Empress Olivia Ron. Her words hit Lucas like thunder, and he opened his eyes wide in shock. His hand reached towards her, as the heroine added that Olivia had fallen into the Emperor's trap. He suddenly approached her and grabbed her throat with both hands. His eyes flashed with madness when Lucas angrily replied that the girl was lying, and that the Empress was pregnant by Gusto. And then he asked who had sent the heroine. The heroine couldn't breathe and tried with all her might to unhook the hand squeezing her neck. Breathing heavily and stammering, the girl said she was Olivia's shadow, and they gave her an order she intended to carry out. When she asked to listen, Lucas looked at her confusedly and loosened his grip slightly, but he immediately reinforced it, asking if it was true, to which the girl answered affirmatively. The heroine understood that it was useless to say she was Olivia, because Lucas wouldn't believe it anyway. The heroine understood that even now, in another body, having nothing, she needed to be close to Byturfin. The girl was still able to remove his hand from her neck when she addressed him first as Highness, and then as Majesty. Looking him easily in the eyes, the heroine added that she would help return the crown to Lucas. And for that, he needed to marry her. The boy looked at her as if she were crazy. He remained silent, and then smiled again at the skill with which she chose expressions. Then he pressed the girl against the window, asking if it was really that easy to get the crown of the Ron state. At that moment, Lucas was thinking that Olivia had been quite smart since childhood, and could foresee his death, and then planned everything in advance. Thinking of the girl's death, the boy clenched his fists again until his fingers turned white. He bit his lip and clenched his fist even tighter against the wall, and the heroine looked surprised at his reaction, amazed that a man who usually showed no emotion now could not contain his anger. The girl remembered the moment when, after betraying her family, they rarely saw each other, but still tried to avoid each other. The heroine was sure that Lucas had long ago erased her, and his feelings for her from his life. She even thought that he hated her. She smiled grimly, realizing that now she was offering him the crown, and that she would most likely have to use her last trump card. At that moment, Lucas replied that since he could not save the mistress, there was no point in helping her, and he advised her to return. Then the heroine said that the Empress, before her death, told her where Princess Serena was, which forced Lucas to stop. Princess Serena was Lucas's younger sister, kidnapped during the coup, and held as a hostage. The heroine remembered that Gusto used the princess's safety to control Lucas, and after the previous Empress's pregnancy, she personally began to gather information and found out the princess's whereabouts. She knew the Emperor's weak spot and took this information to protect her son if something happened. But she didn't even suspect she would have to use it like this. Lucas turned to the heroine. He asked her if she was telling the truth and promised that if she lied, he would pay with his life. In response to this, the girl assured that if the Duke married her, she would show him the place where his sister was, and that she only needed status from him. The heroine continued giving arguments that she would help return the Duke to his throne. She would take revenge, and in the end, everyone would win. The girl noticed the thoughtful expression on Lucas's face, not knowing if he would agree to her proposal. She clasped her hands and brought them to her chest, thinking that it would be difficult if the boy thought for too long. The sky from the window lit up his face when the heroine realized that since no one knew about her death, let alone the funeral, most likely she had died recently. She approached the Duke and assured him that he must hurry. The girl explained this by saying that in the summer corpses decompose faster, and Olivia's death will not be hidden for more days of sobriety. If you wait until then due to the funeral you won't be able to marry and Princess Serena may be transported, and what she knows will become useless. She looked at the boy confidently and told him that he had to leave her here even if he didn't believe it. Lucas stepped back from the heroine, and it was unclear what he was thinking. He asked her if she really thought that would be enough. The heroine flinched, realizing she hadn't managed to convince him. Suddenly the boy approached her and grabbed her by the waist. Taking the heroine's hand to bring his face closer to hers, Lucas added that after the marriage they would have to do something worse, but he wasn't sure if she could do it. Lucas continued saying that apart from love until the grave, he could not find an explanation for the sudden marriage in the middle of the night. The heroine replied that she hadn't thought about it, but again assured him that she would try to play well. But instantly, she moved closer to his face and asked if he wanted to verify the evidence right now. Lucas fell silent for a second and then shouted at his counselor Winter to find an aristocrat under whom the heroine could disguise herself. Before leaving the room, leaving Baron and Winter surprised, wondering, the Duke exclaimed that he was getting married that night and asked to find a priest for the ceremony. Then he stopped for a moment and, without turning around, turned to the heroine with a question. He asked her if she had caught Olivia's last moments, surprising the girl. But the heroine immediately nodded, turning somber and hiding her face with her bangs. For a moment, Lucas's face twisted in pain. He silently said goodbye to the wedding as he left the room. His advisors were still trying to understand what was happening and ran after him. And the heroine frowned and brought her hand to her temple. The heroine was glad she managed to convince the Duke and then felt weak in her body. She fell directly to the floor, which forced Varen and Winter to turn towards the sound. They immediately rushed towards her, and the last thing she saw was Varen's emotional face, who shouted that she couldn't lose consciousness like that. Already at night, when the full moon appeared in the sky, an argument resumed in Lucas's office. Varen reacted extremely emotionally when recounting Lucas's conversation with the heroine, and asked if her words could be believed. Lucas replied that he didn't know himself, because none of his spies in the palace had found out about the Empress's death. The boy understood that if the girl's words were true, then she truly was Empress Olivia's shadow. And if not, most likely it was a trap to harm him. But the boy was again lost in his thoughts, looking out the window. Only he and Olivia knew that promise, so Lucas was more inclined to believe that the heroine was truly the Empress's shadow. He turned again to the elderly Counselor Winter. Lucas asked to know everything about the heroine. At that moment, it was difficult to understand what he was thinking. The heroine's private chambers were lit by many candles on a chandelier when the maid asked about her well-being. The girl was surrounded by maids, lamenting that despite having prepared everything in a hurry, she was still beautiful. One of the women smoothed her hair, which shone and glistened under the wrong light. The girl replied that she felt fine, sitting in a discreet white dress with a minimal amount of jewelry, but they all matched her eyes and looked harmonious. Then another maid entered the room, announcing that the priest had finally arrived. Slow footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the church, and the hem of the long dress trailed behind the heroine's steps. The Duke was also almost ready, and immediately assumed the role when he saw his bride. Lucas extended his hand to the heroine, inviting her inside. The girl immediately extended her hand in response, and the boy took her palm. And so, they stand before the altar when the priest asks them to swear in the holy name of the goddess. The priest asked Lucas if he had promised to marry Briella Ford and love her for the rest of his life. The boy looked at the heroine and hesitated for only a second. Lucas agreed and nodded in confirmation. Then the priest turned to the heroine with the same question. Lifting her hand towards the full moon, she mentally decided that she would not lose the second life, and all the opportunities she had miraculously received. Looking determinedly ahead, the heroine swore her life to the priest. The priest asked to seal the vow with a kiss. The bouquet of snow-white roses fell when the Duke approached the girl. Giving her one last chance, taking her hands in his, he whispered that because of this wedding, he was risking his life, and that if she didn't intend to go all the way, she could still run away now. His face gradually moved closer, as he added that after this, it would be impossible to go back in time. But the heroine wrapped her arms around his shoulders and told him she wasn't going to run away. She whispered that she had also bet everything she had on this wedding and her plan, before her lips pressed hard against his. Breaking the kiss, the boy gently caressed the heroine's cheek and called her by name. With a radiant smile, he exclaimed that they had finally become husband and wife. Briella now gently took his hand in hers, tenderly congratulating him on becoming her master. Lucas asked the priest if the ceremony was over, imperceptibly pulling the girl towards him, to which the priest immediately replied affirmatively, confused. The heroine cried out as the Duke lifted her in his arms. In response to a silent question, the boy smiled seductively and said that he couldn't wait to spend his wedding night with her. Before leaving, he turned to the priest and told him that they had to go. And now they are back at the Baderfin estate. Lucas sat the girl down in a chair and noticed that she was pretending well. To this, the girl reasonably replied that she needed to pretend to be madly in love with him, since she agreed to marry such an age gap, and she herself almost believed in the sincerity of his feelings. Turning away, the guy replied with satisfaction that the priest probably believed him, but then he abruptly turned around, suggesting they skip the wedding night and get down to business. Crossing his arms over his chest, the Duke sadly asked where his sister Serena was. The girl was not afraid of such a gesture, but with an impenetrable expression on her face. She replied that she needed to look for a 14-year-old boy named Noah, who lived at the Cateman orphanage in Renève. The boy was dumbfounded, analyzing the information, remembering that he had scoured the entire empire looking for his sister. But he couldn't even imagine that she was living disguised as a boy. The Duke immediately called Winter and asked if there was any knight who could leave now. And Winter immediately replied affirmatively. But the heroine asked not to do this because after the death of the Empress, chaos ensued in the bureaucratic structure. Winter replied that, on the contrary, this should be the best time to act. But Briella objected, arguing that now the Emperor would watch the Duke even more closely, because he realized that Lucas might take advantage of this situation for his own ends. They reached a deadlock when the heroine picked up a pen, remembering the party that was about to take place. She also remembered the cellar located next to the Renat River, where they produced the best wine in the empire. Lucas thoughtfully said that during the festival, there would be crowds of aristocrats everywhere. Still diligently writing something, the girl felt and added that she could take the princess, but meet her later at the same cellar, citing her desire to have fun at the festival. For a moment, the Duke was lost in thought, and then agreed that it would be safer this way, and said that he should secretly send knights there so that Gusto wouldn't suspect. Winter tried to stop him, saying that if he sent knights there, Lucas himself would be in danger. But the boy abruptly interrupted him, telling him that the dangerous game had started a long time ago, and that there was no turning back. Looking at him threateningly, he asked if Winter really didn't know why the guy allowed himself to be treated that way all these years. Winter looked at the Duke in shock and placed his hand on his chest, but he immediately bowed, apologized, and promised to prepare everything. He was interrupted by the loud sound of a voice from the church. It resonated throughout the imperial palace, attracting everyone and announcing the death of the Empress. This sound made the three of them stop, and even the heroine looked out the window, still holding the pen in her hands. Lucas's expression showed no emotion for a moment, but he clenched his lips, painfully aware that what Briella had said was true, even though he really wished it wasn't. He again began to approach the heroine, telling her that it was a pity that the first official event after the wedding was the Empress's funeral. Upon finishing, the girl put down the pen and replied that, on the contrary, a funeral could be an excellent opportunity. Lucas handed her several documents when Brielle asked him about their content. He replied that this was her role, asking her to read it immediately. And the girl immediately buried her face in the papers. And her role was Briella Ford, the 20-year-old illegitimate daughter of a nobleman from the northern lands, who dreamed of reaching the capital. The girl asked the Duke if this aristocrat was her man and where he was now. He paused, but then replied that she died after being attacked by savages. Hearing this, the heroine was shocked at first, but then saddened realizing the poor girl's cruel fate, who could have lived a long life. Clutching the papers in her hands, she thought about how many deaths Lucas had seen during all this time. Since he talks about it so calmly, the girl really wanted that with her help, the boy's path in the near future would be covered only with flowers. Suddenly, Baron burst into the room and exclaimed that a messenger from the imperial palace had arrived at the estate. Lucas crossed his arms over his chest, smiling because he arrived faster than the boy expected. And then he asked the heroine if she was ready. The heroine replied affirmatively and then threw the papers into the fireplace, because she already knew all the information about Briella. She turned around and exclaimed confidently that it was time for them to go to the palace. Near the estate, a messenger said that Gusto sent him here personally. Lucas pretended not to know about the Empress's death, and the messenger said that the Duke must arrive at the palace as soon as possible. Bitterfen clenched his teeth. He agreed and checked the Emperor's decree. The messenger was about to hitch the carriage when Lucas stopped him. The boy announced that a new person had appeared in the Byturfen family, and that two of them would appear at the funeral. And then he added with a smile that he had married shortly before. At that moment, the heroine was choosing a dress for herself in the boutique. The girl described the dress chosen for her as too chaste, and the maids replied that she was going to the Empress's funeral, and that she was going out in public for the first time. But the heroine objected again, asking if there was another dress. The maid was indignant and asked if the heroine was really going to dishonor the Duke in front of the aristocrats by wearing too pretentious an outfit. With a smile, Brielle asked the maid how she knew if she had ideas for a funeral or a vacation. The maid replied that the Empress herself had died and that it was obvious where the girl was going. But Briella chuckled and said that this event could well be a holiday for someone. That is, someone very specific. And then she clarified again that no one really knows how the Empress was treated in the palace. which made the maid tense. Briella smiled and added that she clearly was not going to mourn the Empress's happy event. The woman opened her mouth trying to say something, but remained silent. Tapping the tiles with her black heels, the girl summarized that she was not going there to mourn the Empress's death. Briella intends to tell everyone about the arrival of a new member to the Baderfin family, and for that she needs to attract everyone's attention. The heroine clarified that the design is not important, as long as the dress is black, and the maids obediently agreed. And now the imperial palace is again lit by the sun. A modest carriage approached the door. The heroine looked out the window, thinking that she was here again, in a place where no one expected her. Briella smiled wickedly, because she never suspected that the day would come when she would be invited to her own funeral. And this made it even funnier. She noticed the intense but expressionless gaze of Lucas sitting opposite her. The girl couldn't help but ask why he looked like that. The boy replied that she was wearing rather flashy clothes for such an event, and the girl explained that for the emperor, this was obviously a real party. The heroine added that this is why she dressed accordingly, and her words made Lucas shudder again. He sighed, but it was impossible not to agree with her. The Duke noticed that the girl seemed to behave confidently, which meant that this was not the first time in the palace, to which the heroine replied affirmatively, but promised that no one would recognize her. The boy thought that even though Briella only looked 20 years old, she was not worried. And this was not the first time she went to the imperial palace, and even before, when she got on a horse. She was full of determination, and when at their wedding she clung to him without fear, it was obvious that her fears, compared to her courage, simply made no sense. Lucas remembered Olivia's image, and somewhere deep in his soul, he thought how much the shadow resembled its owner. Looking at the girl opposite, the Duke mentally asked how she lived all this time. The carriage stopped, and the coachman announced that they had arrived at the place. Getting out of the carriage, the heroine flinched upon hearing her name. Lucas stood in front of her. He extended his hand to her, and told her that even for the sake of their common goal, as long as he calls her Brielle, the heroine's place is by his side. The girl looked at the extended hand and reached hers back without saying a word. But when millimeters were left between their fingers, someone interrupted this brief moment, exclaiming that the Duke was already expected, which is why the heroine pulled her hand away. Lucas turned to the man, who repeated the Emperor's demand. The boy replied that he hadn't had time to say goodbye to the Empress yet, but that they were already calling him. But the man persistently repeated the Emperor's order, refusing to listen to anything. The man added that making the living more important than the dead, and Lucas glared at him. The heroine felt his hand on her shoulder, trembling with anger. The man left and asked the newlyweds to follow him. As they walked, the aristocrats whispered among themselves, discussing the rumors that Duke Whiterfan had gotten married. Some didn't react at all, while others openly condemned the age difference. One of the aristocrats jokingly said venomously that the Duke was not one to pay attention to rumors. The heroine heard all this, and being next to Lucas, the girl realized something important. All this time Lucas endured these insults alone, without support. As they went up the stairs, the girl kept thinking that since even the courtiers allow so many things in the town, then what to say about the Emperor, and how many more insults the Duke will have to endure. The back door of the reception had already opened when the girl realized that it was not yet time to get angry and lose teeth, but to remain hidden and wait for an opportunity to strike. Hearing that same voice calling to enter, the girl gritted her teeth. The door opened slowly, and the Duke and his new wife entered. He sat imposingly on the throne. The Emperor greeted the Duke with a smug smile. Lucas and Briella bowed, greeting the son of the Empire. Descending from the throne, Gusto began to say that he was very disappointed with Bitterfin, because he sent him to save the Empire's inhabitants from the savages, and dared to find a woman there. Getting closer and closer, before stopping in front of the heroine, he mockingly added that he was very curious about which girl the Duke would choose for him. Briella felt his poisonous gaze upon her, as well as his horribly arrogant tone. When he ordered her to show her face, the girl obeyed and slowly began to rise. The heroine called herself Briella by Turfin and rose even higher, preparing to look the man who killed her in the eyes. But instead of looking at him with the meek gaze of a subordinate, she confidently burned him with her eyes, saying that it was an honor for her to meet the Emperor. He looked at the heroine with sadness and assessment, without saying a word. He realized that the girl was looking him directly in the eye, even though she was trembling, not understanding whether she was stupid or too curious. The boy smiled, thinking that the status should be clearly indicated. He chuckled and then admitted that he still couldn't understand how the heroine could captivate someone who was indifferent to women. But now he understood. The emperor approached Briella and placed his hand on her shoulder, asking if she was really from the north. Then he ran his silver locks through his fingers, commenting how unusual the color was. Mocking her with his entire appearance, the boy asked if there was savage blood flowing in the heroine. But suddenly, his expression changed from a venomous smile to one of surprise. Lucas couldn't resist and grabbed Gusto's hand, pulling it away from his wife's hair. The guy justified his actions by the fact that the Ron state had just finished the war with the savages. Gusto smiled wickedly again, agreeing with the Duke's words and pointing out that he himself confirmed it with his meaningful outburst. And he himself thought that Bitterfin did not dare to touch his woman. He decided to tone down Lucas's ardor and reminded that the boy was unlikely to remember the princess when walking to the altar. Lucas trembled with anger as the emperor continued laughing, asking if the Ron Empire needed the princess, or if his brother had already forgotten, and the emperor personally wanted to visit her after the funeral. The heroine understood that Gusto deliberately provoked Bitterfin, probably because the boy pushed him, which caused great indignation. But she understood that it was better not to fall into the trap. And Lucas at that moment could barely restrain himself from answering something, but suddenly he flinched, and his anger was momentarily replaced by astonishment. Briella gently took his hand, trying to calm him down a little. She looked him in the eyes, mentally asking him to remain calm. Lucas still understood her message and clenched his teeth, pushing down a huge lump of anger inside him. He restrained himself and then wondered if His Majesty was really going to visit his sister. Much more calmly, Lucas added that in this case he would like to accompany him personally. And Gusto clearly did not expect such a reaction. The emperor did not understand why the Duke was not clenching his fists impotently now like before, enduring his ridicule. The blonde looked at Briella, trying to find the reason for such a drastic change in Bitterfin. He made a grimace of anger, realizing that this time he had lost the verbal fight. Then the boy made a hand gesture, ordering them both to leave, because it was time to say goodbye to the empress. Suddenly, the emperor decided to have the last word and asked if they knew how she died, which made Briella flinch. With the same venomous smile, Gusto said that actually his empress, the chaste and prudent mother of the empire, was having an affair. Looking at Lucas, the boy added that it didn't matter who her lover was. What audacity this was. And that with the birth of the child, the whole truth would have come out anyway. And his last sentence, that it was precisely because of this that death took the unfaithful empress, made the heroine freeze and betrayingly flinch again right in front of the exit door. She smiled thickly and victoriously when she thought that Briella by Turfin didn't even realize that her husband might be the very same lover. When suddenly, that same unsuspecting heroine interrupted his tirade. Smiling and taking Lucas by the arm, the girl replied that His Majesty had experienced a sad event that discredited his authority. She feigned uttering almost sincere words of condolence, and then they said goodbye. He clenched his teeth tightly and realized that he hadn't managed to mock them again. He clenched his fists in anger. He gritted his teeth, but couldn't say anything about it. Meanwhile, people were lining up in the temple to send the empress to another world. The atmosphere in the temple was not mournful at all, because people, although wearing blackened robes, behaved as if they were simply attending a regular banquet. And some were even laughing. Suddenly, an aristocrat exclaimed excitedly that although Duke Bitterfin's marriage was shocking, no one could have thought that the deceased empress was capable of committing treason. And Briella heard this. A trio of typical gossips began to speculate that Olivia's lover was her ex-fiancé. That is, Lucas. Waving her fan, one of them smiled. The three girls looked at Duchess Whiterfan, expecting a reaction. Looking at them with a contemptuous gaze, the girl thought that it didn't matter where she was. People were the same everywhere. And then she smiled bitterly at her thoughts, holding a lily in her hands, with whose help she would have to say goodbye on her final journey. The aristocrats did not understand why the heroine was laughing. The blonde who started this topic approached the heroine and addressed her, determined to ruin her mood. She then waved her fan again and asked with bile why Briella hadn't placed the flower, because very soon the empress would be buried. To this, the heroine calmly replied that she really needed to leave. The girl with the fan thought that the duchess, being from the north, definitely didn't know the etiquette of imperial funerals, and she already had a premonition of the shame this would bring. Meanwhile, the heroine approached her own coffin and leaned over its face. She taught how to say goodbye to the imperial family, but she would have to perform the ceremony over her own body. Lifting the lilies over the coffin, the girl began to remember that first she needed to hold the wall with one hand and support it from below with the other, then dissipate the aroma with 3 circular movements. After this, the flower must be placed in the direction of the body, and to conclude, join hands in prayer expressing sorrow. During the prayer, the girl seemed to see her silhouette moving away and said goodbye to Olivia, and to the life she lived only for the sake of others. Once the ritual was finished, all eyes turned to Briella. No one expected that the woman from the north, who had recently moved to the capital and became Durfin's wife, would carry out the ritual without a single mistake. The blonde gritted her teeth in anger, disappointed by the defeat. Then it was announced to all mourners that members of their family should spend their last time alone with the deceased, and everyone else was asked to go to the cemetery. Lucas approached Briella and told her that they were also going to the cemetery. And so, as they walked quickly on the path to the cemetery, the heroine suddenly stopped. Lucas turned to her and asked what was wrong, to which the girl only mumbled that she had forgotten something in the funeral hall. Suddenly, she ran in the opposite direction, and as she ran, she asked him to go ahead. The boy didn't even have time to come to his senses. Running forward, the girl thought she had made a mistake, and the courtiers distracted her by not saying goodbye to the boy. But if she didn't do it, regret would consume her. Briella carefully opened the door to the funeral hall. She heard voices of someone upstairs and decided to see who was there, even though she hoped no one was. Quickly climbing the stairs, the girl followed the sound. Hiding behind the wall, she saw Gusto talking to someone. The Emperor's interlocutor was none other than her father. The girl looked at this scene in shock, trying to understand why both were now in an empty funeral hall. Olivia's father, the Marquis of the Rhone, was a man obsessed with the importance of family and duty. The trial girl was raised solely for the benefit of the family. She was sold to Gusto precisely at her father's insistence, like an object, and it was thanks to him that she ended up in the thorny thicket of imperial life. The father knew better than anyone what the heroine had to go through day by day, but not a word of support came from his lips during her entire stay in the palace. And now he bowed kindly to the emperor, not knowing that this man had killed his daughter. The girl began trying to listen to what they were talking about. Gusto said that all the people were taken away and they were left alone, which means that the Marquis of the Rhone could speak freely. To which he bowed. Then Gusto admitted that it wasn't his intention. Everything happened exactly like that, because initially, as agreed, he wanted to deal with Olivia next year. Hearing these words, the girl opened her mouth in shock and grabbed the wall. The emperor justified himself by saying that his beloved concubine, Eva, was constantly causing scandals, and that it was very undesirable to lose her. When Gusto added that due to the pregnancy, the empress's death was only a matter of time, the girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father not only knew the emperor's plans, but also helped kill his own daughter. The pain of realization did not allow her to think, and the heroine did not understand why they were so eager to kill her, and she still wanted to think that Gusto's words were a lie. The Marquis hesitated for a second, but there was no sadness on his face. This second passed, and he replied with a smile that, as it was the wise emperor's decision, he would follow. He laughed out loud and noted that she had a great tongue and that the boy wouldn't mind having a drink with his toast. Now understanding seemed to strike his whole body like lightning, when the only question in her head was why selling her daughter for family benefit wouldn't be enough. But the heroine suddenly realized that deep down she expected something like this, because her father had never cared about Olivia or the good empress. Her body trembled, either from anger or from the pain of betrayal, as she realized that all her efforts to improve for him were simply trampled upon by him. Due to her nervousness, she accidentally made an unnecessary sound. The Marquis and Emperor Wind heard a strange sound echoing in the silence. Briella clamped her mouth shut in fear, afraid to make another sound, but already realizing that she had been discovered. The Marquis of the Rhone said with a smile that apparently the rat was hiding somewhere. The emperor agreed with him and went to inspect the places where this rat could be found. His footsteps sounded deafening every second, getting closer and closer to the wall behind which Briella was hiding. She tried to move, but the trembling got stronger and her legs stopped working. She understood that if she did nothing they would discover her, and this scared her even more. But suddenly, Warm hands grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her back. She looked behind the wall where she was just a second ago, but to her surprise, there was no one around the corner. The boy thought he definitely heard something. At that moment, Lucas held Briella and covered her mouth with his hand so she wouldn't scream again. There was a small mouse on the floor. It walked heavily towards it and mercilessly crushed its small spine, causing blood to splash everywhere. His gaze was bloodthirsty, as he hissed that this would happen to anyone who stood in his way. He turned around and walked back towards his interlocutor, and Lucas heard their footsteps. The boy noticed that Gusto was with the Marquis and wondered what they were talking about. But he was distracted when he felt the heroine trembling. Lucas decided that he needed to get out of here somehow before they were both discovered. He whispered quietly that if they stayed here a little longer, their absence would arouse suspicion. So he would carry her in his arms and then asked her not to make any sound. He lifted her in his arms and carefully carried her out of there. And so, they finally meet at the cemetery, where a crowd of people honor the memory of the deceased empress. Only then did Lucas set the girl down on the ground, and her whole body stopped trembling. After this, the Duke asked what happened and why the girl suddenly broke down and ran away. The heroine looked at the ground, apologizing, and then asked why he had followed her. Lucas replied that it was better for the newlyweds not to separate. Then he wanted to add something else, but stopped mid-sentence. The boy realized that, for the first time, he saw confusion in this exceptionally brave woman. As he thought, it was suspicious that Gusto and the Marquis of Rhoda were not there, but he realized that perhaps he shouldn't worm everything out of her yet. Therefore, the Duke sighed and said that if she didn't want to tell, then he wouldn't bother asking questions. Suddenly, Lucas looked at someone he saw out of the corner of his eye. It was the Marquis, with the gloomiest look, walking up the stairs. The Marquis greeted Duke Whiterfin and drew attention to the heroine, who immediately introduced herself as Briella. The Marquis nodded and noted that the cemetery was still an unsuitable place to meet, so he suggested meeting properly next time. The man had already started to walk away when the girl called him again. With a bitter smile, she said that although there were bad rumors about the Empress's death, he was glad to see him so cheerful. The Marquis paused for a moment again and then bowed. He replied that he apologized for his daughter's inappropriate behavior and said goodbye. The heroine nodded at him, looking gloomier than a cloud. After the Marquis left, Lucas spoke and admitted that he didn't understand what was happening, and he didn't know exactly what she saw behind the wall. The boy gently grabbed her by the shoulders. After this, the Duke added that if Briella is calling to cry, it's better not to keep it to herself. Much more calmly, he said that today was a suitable enough day for them, when the heroine looked at him with a little hope. And after a moment, she became sad again and looked down. Tears rolled down her cheeks for the first time in a long time, allowing her to let go of the accumulated pain. Of resentment, of anger towards people, towards fate, and towards her weakness. On the day of Empress Olivia's funeral, the sky wept with her. Normally, when a member of the royal family dies, the mourning period lasts about a week. But in Olivia's case, it was reduced to only 3, and it was over. And the heroine, either from shock or lack of rest after rebirth, she stayed in bed for 3 days after returning from the funeral. The scorching sun rose over the Baderfin mansion as the heat rose like a haze on a summer day, and did not retreat an inch. A few days later, an invitation arrived in Briella's name. The girl examined the letter and its seal, and concluded that it was from the imperial palace. The heroine opened the letter, scanned the lines with her gaze, and discovered the sender. The letter, in careful handwriting and sealed with the imperial seal, was sent by Eva Perina. Next to the heroine was Winter holding a watering can, who noticed that the girl was not surprised that Eva wrote a letter. Briella replied that she expected something like this from her, and I thought that she was already preparing to hear the news about Eva's proclamation as empress. The girl realized that Perina had more opponents than she thought, because she didn't have a proper position. Only the imperial castle, but even that was in Gusto's name. However, she sent the letter with this particular seal, which means she is making excellent use of her position even without a title. Winter looked at the girl again. The man asked her if she would like to prepare clothes and jewelry for this occasion, and even suggested the outfits of a certain Madame Blanc, which are preferred by many married women. The girl remembered Madame Blanc as a famous and promising designer. Without stopping watering the flowers, Winter agreed and added that although Briella had outfits on the estate, they were not enough. The heroine had to agree with his arguments, because in reality, she married the Duke without a dowry. When she agreed, the man smiled warmly, and then the girl asked to write a letter in her own hand. The door to the Duke's office opened silently when he allowed entry. It turns out that not only Briella wanted to talk, but Lucas too. The boy asked how the heroine felt, and admitted that Baron hadn't found a place for him this whole time, but that the girl hadn't been well for several days prior. Briella reassured him by telling him she had already fully recovered, and clarified if that was all he wanted to ask. The Duke paused, thinking how to say it correctly, and then, suddenly, let slip that someone had been assigned to Serena as security. The girl exclaimed in shock, to which Lucas asked if she had seen it coming, and the answer was no. Briella said that Her Majesty, the Empress, discovered the princess's whereabouts shortly before her death, and she started wondering at what point Gusto found out about this. Biting her lip until it bled, the girl began to lament that if it weren't for her carelessness, the princess would have been found sooner, thinking that because of her, Lucas had once again missed his sister. But the boy interrupted her remorse by abruptly approaching. He lifted her face by the chin and wiped the blood from her lip, to which the girl only groaned in agreement. And Lucas said that neither the heroine nor her lips were to blame for what happened. She looked at him hopefully and asked if he was angry, and the Duke replied that no one knows the Emperor's thoughts, but that he now knows Serena's whereabouts. He is sincerely grateful. The heroine blamed herself again, upon realizing how affectionate he was. The Duke placed a comforting hand on her shoulders and told her that Biterfins are often called leashed dogs. He continued, pointing out that it was different with Briella, because despite the burden of this surname, she independently decided to stand by Lucas's side. And when the boy finally said that if she was already depressed, then they had problems, hope reappeared in her eyes. She nodded and replied that she would keep that in mind. Lucas summarized his point by saying they needed to monitor the situation and adjust plans when necessary. He wanted to continue, but looked at the girl. Then the Duke looked down again, searching for words. In the end, Lucas added that he believes his feelings for Olivia are genuine, even if her identity is questionable. The man finished by saying that she, as the Duke's wife, can take whatever she needs from his budget. Lucas asked if she had come then, and the girl's face lit up again, thinking the Duke trusted her. Lucas joked that she could decorate the estate to match her lover, and the girl laughed sincerely for the first time in a long time. But she instantly became serious when she approached him and told him the mansion didn't need remodeling, because she planned to make sure Biterfin returned to his true home. The heroine gently took his palm and brought it closer to her. She brought her palm to her forehead as a sign of submission to her true ruler, saying that not even 2 winters would pass before His Majesty ascended to the middle place. The boy smiled and asked if she really wanted to help him. The girl answered with all sincerity that from the beginning she wanted to help him, but now, seeing his faith, she realized she had made the right decision. The boy just chuckled at this, but he was actually happy to have such loyal people by his side. Briella realized that the time had come to part, with the shadow of Olivia buried underground. The Emperor, Eva, and the Marquis of the Rhone had already taken action, so now she needed to take a step. And at least little by little, she needed to move forward. And Lucas again thought about the strangeness of this girl. He met a Briella in the lower districts, but every move she made exuded nobility, as if she had been given a decent education. And the Duke couldn't help but notice how much her habits, her phrases, reminded him of someone. And even her smile, she was exactly the same as the one who walked away from him. Looking at the heroine again, the boy mentally wondered who she was. Some time later, at Madame Blanc's shop, Madame Blanc asked the servant who brought the envelope from whom the letter was, and he replied that it was from the Biterfin estate. The woman frowned, realizing that it was the same Duchess who was now the talk of the town, and her status did not allow her to refuse. She decided that the heroine was simply an ignorant palate, which meant she needed to convey to her that Madame Blanc was a high-flying bird. As a result, the woman decided to postpone the answer and threw the letter aside. At that moment, at the Biterfin estate, the heroine asked if Madame Blanc had sent a reply. Winter replied negatively, and the girl wondered why. Briella concluded that a woman weighs importance, so the heroine will have to tip the scales first. The girl, rapidly tapping the parquet floor with her heels, asked to be informed that she herself would go to the shop. The heroine confidently added that there, she would show which of the two is actually more significant. After a while, the servant again turns to Madame Blanc. The woman incomprehensibly asks him why he is making so much noise, to which the boy replies that in a new letter from the Biterfin, a state they write that they are already on their way to the shop. The woman asked confusedly what he was talking about. She understood that if rumors spread that the Duchess herself had come to see the commoner, then her reputation would be greatly affected, and the great woman couldn't even imagine that the heroine would personally come to her. She tried to rectify the situation, ordering that everything be prepared for the trip to the heroine's estate. But the boy mumbled that she had almost arrived. At that moment, the carriage stopped right next to the shop. The heroine entered the shop, announcing her presence. Madame Blanc greeted Briella, who smiled knowing that, after all, their meeting had taken place. Pointing to a small amount of sweets and 2 cups of tea, the woman admitted that she had prepared in a hurry, but she managed to organize a tea party and invited the girl to sit down. The heroine also asked the woman not to stand and explained that she had arrived so quickly because she had not received a reply to her letters, and she feared for Madame's health. The woman thanked her for her concern and justified that her illness forced her to take a temporary break. But the girl immediately realized that this was just a stupid excuse. The girl, with an impenetrable gaze, asked her to stop her pettiness and not deceive her. The woman flinched and said that the heroine had a sharp tongue, although she was from the north. Briella calmly replied that she didn't need her ridiculous comment. Madame Blanc gritted her teeth, not understanding why the timid and rumored savage responded to the collision, and responded to every word. The woman decided to continue and asked why the girl came in the end, and she was rude too. Briella replied that it was clearly not her, who ignored the Duchess's call to say that. She put the cup on the table and calmly continued, but this time the girl said that if the woman had sold simple clothes, the heroine wouldn't have come. Madame Blanc was amazed, and the Duchess added that Madame Blanc's outfits had a special elegance. Briella explained that a woman's attire has the ability to highlight the person wearing it, regardless of the seasonal fashion, and Madame Blanc, embarrassed, thanked the heroine for those words. The Duchess also said that the cost of these garments cannot be assessed with money, which means the lady doesn't need them. Pacing back and forth, Briella praised the talent of the Blanc ladies, saying that their clothes represented nobility, money, and influence. Once again, the girl turned abruptly, drawing attention to her words. The heroine asked what was the nobility of the manufacturer of these clothes. Madame Blanc asked if the heroine was referring to her, to which the girl asked, what about those clients of the mistress who have power? The woman flinched again when the girl noted that these influential people did not prevent the northerner simpleton from calling her. Madame Blanc smiled bitterly, remembering how she was rejected by the nobility. She started sewing at the age of 10. And everything she achieved herself. She knew that many aristocrats attended banquets wearing her clothes, but she was never invited to them. The girl cited her own thoughts, saying that due to her status, no matter how many auctions are held for Madame Blanc's outfits, she is still not considered a noblewoman. And then she extended her hand to her. The girl promised to give her the influence she is trying to achieve. Madame Blanc looked at the Duchess in astonishment, and then she laughed, because with the Duke's current position she wouldn't see the title. But the heroine didn't react to the laughter, because she was speaking absolutely seriously. Briella promised to give back the place that was taken from the woman, which made her open her mouth in shock. The heroine also knew from imperial information that Madame Blanc's father himself was a pure noble, and that he had to marry a woman of similar status. And Madame Blanc's mother, a commoner, had no choice but to leave with the child. And already as an adult, Madame Blanc hid that she was the illegitimate daughter of a nobleman and, as a mother, lived without status. Madame Blanc became sad and replied that her place in nobility was only half of her place. The girl clarified that the woman herself could not fully occupy it, but she needed to return it now, at least for the sake of her son. As soon as the heroine mentioned her son, Madame Blanc flinched. Briella insisted that the mistress clearly does not want her son to have the same life, in which it is impossible to reach higher. The girl sighed, mentally summarizing that in the future there would be retribution for the misfortune of other people. And then she insisted again on how attractive the deal with her was, and Madame Blanc began to tremble again. She remained silent a while longer, contemplating her decision one last time, and then, hesitantly, she asked what exactly she had to do. The day for tea at the Imperial Palace arrived. Briella arrived at the garden where the picnic was held, and the butler helped her out of the carriage. And from afar, all this was accompanied by the stares of Eva and her friends. The heroine stood before an incredibly beautiful image of Madame Blanc, and thought that the weather outside was simply incredible. The butler escorted the girl to the table where the noble ladies were seated and announced that she had arrived. But Eva began talking about the harvest in the south without paying attention to her. Her friend, Countess Lawrence, actively supported the conversation, similarly ignoring the Duchess's presence. Realizing what was happening, the girl smiled. She raised an eyebrow, laughing at how childish it was to pretend she wasn't there. To this, the girl turned around and headed back to the carriage, and the butler tried to stop her. She turned to him and told him that no one had invited her here, and that if they had, she would return. And then she smiled venomously, stating that among those present there were clearly none who had the right to use the imperial seal. She noticed Perina's glare, who even clenched her fists in anger. At that moment, at the Byturfin estate, Baron asked Lucas what he was going to do. The Duke asked again, and Baron clarified what he meant by the new lady. Lucas crossed his arms and asked him what was wrong. While packing the books, the assistant explained that even with his unlimited love and his decision to marry secretly, they didn't actually look like a special couple. The books gradually got smaller as Lucas refuted Baron's words and added that before, even if he wanted to, he couldn't be interested in girls. But since he is not a personal advisor, the video passes through him, so he asked the Duke not to deny it and take responsibility for the lady. Approaching the Duke, Baron added that now she is in the public eye and a small mistake is enough to arouse suspicion. Lucas thought while looking out the window and then said that since that was the case, then he had to leave. At that moment, the heroine continued to provoke Eva with the words that the Emperor wrote the letter. Since the Empress was not there, the concubine got up from the table, determined to do something. This is exactly what the Duchess was looking for, because the fact that Eva wore the imperial family seal would become a subject of ridicule if the aristocrats found out. The girls exchanged angry glances, ready to tear each other apart, when suddenly a familiar voice was heard, which made Briella flinch. The Emperor himself came to the tea party with an unpleasant and smug smile, apologizing for inviting guests but making them wait. Eve ran past Briella towards Gusto, almost inspired by the forces of love, and the heroine bowed, greeting the Emperor, to which Gusto ordered her to straighten up, and then said that due to urgent matters, he asked Eva to prepare for his arrival. Briella replied that Perina was not paying attention to her at all, so the heroine reasonably thought she was in the wrong place. Then Gusto carefully touched the concubine's cheek and asked if she felt well today, to which the girl, of course, replied affirmatively, and Briella looked with pain in her eyes at the kind of affection the Emperor was capable of. And so all the guests sat at the table, overflowing with all sorts of sweets, and the aroma of tea drowned out the scent of the garden flowers. Gusto proclaimed today's gathering a small reception in honor of the Duchess. The heroine replied that she didn't think His Majesty would organize everything personally, and the aristocrat sitting next to her exclaimed that the Emperor had an unlimited soul. Gusto replied with a smile that it was his duty to take care of his subjects, but he recalled that the Duke's wedding and the Duchess was secret and said that this was very depressing for him. Briella reacted to this in no way, just gracefully sipped tea from a cup with aristocratic grace. The Emperor did not take his predatory gaze off her when he was truly impressed with the Duchess, and noticed something he hadn't seen at the funeral. He asked an immodest question about the fact that, despite her origin and recent move from the north, the girl was already familiar with etiquette. The heroine was not surprised, and replied with a smile that the Duke taught her everything. She raised an eyebrow in a questioning gesture, asking if they were talking about the same Byturfin, because, as she thought, the Duke was only interested in stabbed people, but it turned out he was very kind to his wife. The girl put the cup on the saucer, replying that Lucas was very kind to her. She added a little embarrassed that he was kinder to her than anyone in this world. Illuminated by the sun's rays, Gusto caught this moment and noticed that the heroine now looks like the daytime moon. Eva noticed that the heroine is an outsider and doesn't know that Gusto likes Lucas. Her friend, who always nodded, intervened in the conversation again, laughing because otherwise Duke Byturfin wouldn't spare a word in his pocket. The heroine remained silent, but thought that it was not up to Countess Lawrence to say such a thing. And then she decided to change the subject. The Duchess took the sweets when the aristocrat next to her spoke again. The girl praised Briella's gloves, and Countess Lawrence picked them up, saying, "You are the first to see something like this." With a kind smile, the heroine said that all this was the work of Madame Blanc, who had recently become her personal fashion designer. The Marquise replied confusedly that it was the first time she had heard of Madame Blanc and of her new status, and that no one in the capital yet had a personal fashion designer. Still smiling, Briella replied that then she wouldn't mind being the first. Eva smiled because the girl had a big appetite, even if it wasn't noticeable from her. Crossing her fingers in a graceful gesture, the heroine replied that it wasn't greed. She simply didn't want to wear the same clothes as others, and then added that she had learned the importance of showing respect to someone closer to courtesy. Then she asked if Eve would like it if she made an effort to get to know her and everyone else, hinting that Perina did exactly the opposite. At the same time, the heroine put great emphasis on calling the concubine lady. It was clear that Eva was burning with anger, but she tried to restrain herself. The concubine became angry, realizing that only Empress Olivia dared to call her that, and the heroine simply imagined herself as noble. Gusto watched this in silence and found it interesting entertainment. He realized that the heroine seemed accustomed to communicating with noble ladies, but he decided not to interfere in the women's quarrels. The boy applauded, distracting his companions, and asked forgiveness for leaving first. Already getting up from the table, the emperor joked that if he stayed a little longer, an advisor would come and strangle him. Eva ran to him again, groaning that no one dared to drown, and then asked if he had forgotten something. The emperor hugged the concubine and kissed her forehead, whispering softly that he would never forget her. The brunette started admiring their relationship, and Briella sank, realizing what the emperor could be like without her. She even had the feeling that Olivia did not exist at all. The girl sighed deeply, accepting reality. Suddenly Countess Lawrence exclaimed something, and Briella also paid attention. At that very moment Duke Byturfin arrived. He approached the emperor and greeted him as expected. With a sarcastic smile, Gusto asked what had brought the Duke here, because it definitely wasn't a tea party with the ladies. Lucas replied that he was worried about his wife, because she still didn't know the imperial palace at all. The emperor tried to joke, but it was clear that he was getting increasingly irritated when he asked if love was more important than the emperor. When a soft hand touched his shoulder, the heroine flinched but said nothing. A slight half-smile appeared on her face when Lucas asked if Gusto really thought so. His hands now rested on the main character's waist. With a smug smile, Lucas asked if the emperor was motivated by envy. The girl didn't understand why he came, but looking at this crowd of hypocrites and liars, she realized she was very happy that Lucas had come. But Gusto tensed up and got angry, not understanding what there was to envy when both were in that position. He realized that everything had changed since their wedding, and now Byturfin was becoming increasingly difficult to read, let alone manipulate. The emperor was sure that after the funeral, the Duke would rush to find his sister, and even assign guards to her, but this did not happen. Only one question tormented him as the boy looked at the Duke couple. He couldn't believe it was his wife from the north. The emperor smiled into his hand, thinking he had found a new weak spot. With a condescending smile, he said that since the Duke had changed so much, it meant he truly loved his wife. The heroine flinched when the man asked if the Duke thought he had hurt his beloved wife. Memories of how he killed her with his own hands came back to her head. And now, without a pang of conscience, he dared to say such a thing. Lucas also smiled hard at him, agreeing that His Majesty could not stoop to such baseness. The atmosphere between the couples grew hotter every second. Now the heroine gently stroked her husband's palm with sweetness. Briella trembled a little, but still looked at the boy, reminding him that they were both above this. She sighed and realized she had fallen for the provocations again, allowing herself to be hurt. Finally, the boy noticed how the heroine was trembling from the memories. The girl remembered that very moment of death, and all the pain returned to her. Lucas realized that she was feeling bad and that he needed to help her somehow. He thought while scratching his chin with his finger. And then, the aristocrats gasped in surprise when the snow-white cloak fluttered in the wind. A moment later, the girl was already sitting at the table, covered with a warm cloth. Lucas kindly said it was quite cold outside and addressed her as his wife. A little confused, but the girl agreed with this, and both seemed lost in their own selves without noticing anyone around. The girls commented that they had never seen Lucas so romantic, which means the rumor about Duke Byturfin's love was true. And one of the ladies said that her count was not even half as much so. Addressing His Majesty, the Duke said he would like to leave today, as it seemed his wife was not well, to which he replied that the facts coincided successfully, and His Majesty didn't want to drink any more tea either. After which, the emperor continued saying that Lucas and his wife should leave his palace. Upon leaving, Lucas said, "God bless His Majesty," which infuriated the emperor, and he thought that the duke was angering him just by his presence. Eva immediately ran after the emperor. The nearby ladies wondered if the fact that the hosts had left meant that the tea party was over. Briella said that no matter where you look, there is no trace of sophistication, and it is time for them to leave too. One of the girls called the Duchess and asked if she would mind attending the next tea party. She would like to get to know Briella better. Duchess Taryn is the ruling family of the East and a representative of the neutral aristocracy. There is no reason to refuse. In that case, Briella will gladly accept her invitation. The Duchess didn't have time to introduce herself, but Briella already knew who she was and who she was. That is why she accepted the invitation so quickly. Overall, during today's tea party, she managed to achieve 2 goals at once: the minimum favor from the court ladies and starting the first rumors. And the second goal was something else. She approached the lady, who was Countess Lawrence, and asked if that was so. She seemed to have seen her at the funeral. Turning around, the Countess replied that so many faces appeared before her eyes that day. Briella invited the Countess for a cup of tea at the Byturfen mansion to get to know each other better, to which the Countess reacted furiously. For her, visiting there would be amusing. After thanking her for the invitation, she decided to evade it and say that she was busy with her matters at the moment, and she suggested postponing the visit. Briella offered to help her make a decision and forcefully asked in another language what the Countess would do if she knew her secret. The Countess, frightened, dropped her fan and asked where she knew that language from. The Duchess turned around and asked with a smile if the Countess would eventually accept her invitation. In the Emperor's palace, everything was thrown and smashed against the walls. Eva was frightened by the Emperor's behavior, which irritated and angered him even more. So he ordered the maid to immediately remove her from the rooms she was in. To which Eva replied saying that this was her palace and that she would be in it, and she asked not to worry about her. Eva's words were not heard by the Emperor at all. He was only thinking about why everything was turning out this way. The unwanted Empress Olivia was eliminated. The Marquis of Ron also became meek, and it seemed to him that there were no more annoying people for him. While thinking about Briella and Lucas, a moment later, the Emperor invited the butler to his house. He announced that he was going to exile Duke Byturfen and asked him to prepare a letter for the Duchess. Clenching his fists in anger, he said that nothing could be taken from him. If necessary, the Emperor is even willing to cut off his head, just as the Emperor's father did to his father. A few days later, while picking up the Duchess, she was informed that Countess Lawrence had arrived, to which Briella asked to be taken to the garden. Briella was having her petticoat hemmed, and the lady said she would return as soon as the lace part was finished. Lucas himself immediately entered Briella's room. She was very surprised why he decided to come and what the problem was, to which he said he just wanted to come with his own wife without any reason. The Duchess thought how cunning he was, but she still didn't trust him. She suggested that Lucas go, as she had just finished trying things on. Briella and Lucas walked through the palace while one of the servants followed him. She decided to ask him that it seemed he hadn't seen all the servants, if that was the reason he was so kind to her. Lucas told her that there could be spies among the new employees, so he decided to behave politely, and anyone could eavesdrop and tell others. Briella asked if this was the same as the tea ceremony he took her out of. Taking her hand, he replied affirmatively yes. Feeling it well in his hand, she was surprised by his action and continued saying that he was acting well if necessary. But the Duke reminded her that she also skillfully faked at the wedding. Acting so recklessly becomes more troublesome over time. Perhaps because by playing without emotion, she feels close to him. Or it is a matter of remorse. It seems Briella has been distracted by her thoughts. They should work together with a purpose. After mentally ordering herself to recover, she realized that she had to skillfully deceive people. When they reached the flower garden, Briella asked Lucas how he could pretend so well. Turning to look at her, he didn't have time to reply before the Duchess said that he does it very well when necessary, as was the case at the tea party, and that this doesn't work on her at all. Lucas, pressing the Duchess slightly against the wall, said it was too late to tell her that, and that they had already arrived, so he would tell her later. But she must remember that they don't know when they are truly alone and can arouse suspicion. Lucas had just left when the Countess suddenly appeared behind Briella. Briella apologized for being late, to which the Countess simply bowed and thanked her for the invitation. The Duchess proposed taking a walk before tea, because the glass garden of the Baderfin estate was very beautiful. The Countess was lost in awkwardness. She was thinking about where to start the conversation. Briella started talking about the flowers that were right in front of them. She still continued emphasizing that these flowers were incredibly beautiful. But then the Countess interrupted the Duchess and asked if she knew about her. And Kali, Briella spoke in Kali language, as if the long-awaited moment had arrived. The Countess would have believed her. The Countess grabbed Briella and started asking her how she achieved such a perfect pronunciation, and if by chance she was Kalish. If she were a Kalila, then in that case she would have to kneel. The Countess was still perplexed by what was happening now. The Countess's true identity, Oren's, whom everyone was told Gustola executed. In fact, she managed to escape before the fall of the palace. She was the last princess of Kali and the only heiress. Since she was greatly loved in the kingdom and was not brought into the world, very few people knew this information. Apparently, this continued to protect her to this day. The Duchess said that the Countess was quite sad and showed her cards so directly. But this is not at all the reason why the Countess was invited. And it is time to get to the truth. Oren's was tremendously furious. Briella was not connected to Kali in any way and simply discovered her to take advantage of her secret. Briella joked with the Countess, saying that she couldn't even imagine how she had survived until now with such inhibited intelligence. And how this conversation continued, we will find out very soon in the new parts of the video on my channel. I am working hard on the final next part of this manga.